Good evening, Mr. Bond fans, and welcome once again. As we've covered many times on this channel before, the 007 roster of villains is some of the most eccentric and colourful in all of cinema history, so it's always appropriate when they get equally eccentric and colourful demises. Bond has to kill a lot of people from mission to mission, so it's only natural that the filmmakers have to come up with a variety of amusing and shocking ways of him achieving this. I mean, it wouldn't be terribly fun if he just shot people every mission, would it? No, we want our villains blown up, set on fire, eaten by sharks, the works, because it isn't true cinematic justice unless a dastardly foe meets an entertaining and embarrassing end. So here we go. Today we're counting down my own personal top 10 best Bond villain deaths. Starting as we always do with a dishonourable mention. The Spy Who Loved Me is one of my very favourite films in the series, but I've never been terribly enamoured with Stromberg as a villain. He's just kind of unremarkable, and suitably his death is too. Bond just shoots him a few times. Firstly in the groin, I guess? And then in the chest, and Stromberg just sort of slowly slumps down the table. It isn't terribly exciting. It's often better when a villain meets their end as a result of an element of their special feature, of their accoutrement, if you like, being used against them. Much like how Teehee hook hand leads to Bond getting the upper hand in Live and Let Die. Stromberg's under-the-table gun is hardly a signature weapon, and I'd much rather have had Bond stuff him down that elevator trap to be eaten by his own sharks, but c'est la vie. I love Xenia on a top, and I think her death scene is great. After making herself known for asphyxiating her victims with her athletic legs, the henchwoman meets a rather squeezed end herself. This very almost makes it into the top 10, but for the fact that I would have liked it to be just a little bit more brutal. You know, maybe we hear a bone snap, or give it a bit of extra punch in some other kind of regard, but as it happens, she's just kind of wriggling around for a bit until she loses breath. I actually think the character's reimagined death in the GoldenEye Reloaded video game improved on what we see in the film, having her dragged down a chasm by a helicopter and eventually falling into its flames. Number 10. Lacking a printing press to lob Elliot Carver into In Tomorrow Never Dies, Bond has to settle for a CVAC drill instead. I love this sequence. It's incredibly satisfying to see Carver, who's quite a sadistic and ruthless character, whimpering for his life as his mechanical aquatic beast devours him. Totally appropriate given how many innocent lives he's taken with the same device over the course of the film. Only slightly marked down because of how the scene looks. I mean, I don't know why Carver just doesn't move away. I mean, Bond leaves him on the control panel in the path of the CVAC, but then he just kind of steps back and Carver stays put to meet his maker, which is odd considering he's not restrained in any way, but you know, whatever. I especially love how Carver's screams blend into the sound of the blades grinding. Such a nice touch and a brilliant bit of sound design. Number 9. This one gets points for being probably the slowest villain death in the series. Well, maybe at least. I mean, there's always a chance that Bond never sent anyone back to apprehend Whisper once he trapped him in that canister. Anyway, Bond drives Greene out into the middle of the desert, leaves him a can of motor oil, and drives off. And that's it. At this point, Bond knows that if the desert doesn't kill Greene, his own organisation will for failing his objectives. It's just so sadistic of Bond to leave him with the motor oil. It's great. We only find out that the villain is even dead later on when M mentions it, but she also mentions that Greene had bullets in his body when they found him. Not overly keen on that development myself. I would much rather have just left the film believing that, yeah, you know what, Dominic Greene did die after trudging through dozens of miles of desert with no food or water, but I do really love Bond's reaction to the question that M asks him at the end of the film.
They found motor oil in his stomach. Does that mean anything to you?
Wish I could help.
Number 8. I'd argue that Goldfinger set the precedent for silly, over-the-top Bond villain deaths. This is just so daft, but also incredibly brilliant. Goldfinger accidentally shoots out one of the plane windows, causing him to be sucked out into the open air. It's undeniable that the effects of this particular bit have not aged well. Goldfinger flying around in the air is really hokey, and when he does eventually pop out of the window, you can just imagine some crew members on the other side of the set having to yank Gert Frobe out the window. But it's just so funny that I can't help but love it.
What happened? Where's Goldfinger?
Playing his golden harp.
Number 7. So I know that Bond sends Hans into the piranha pool in You Live Twice, but Helga's dip into said pool is definitely the better of the two piranha-based deaths in the movie. The setup is a little clunky, with Helga staying behind Asato in front of Blofeld for a moment longer, for no good reason other than so that she can be on the bridge by herself when she walks over it. But I just love the mechanism, I love the bubbles in the water, Helga's screams, how we don't actually see any of the piranhas, and yet we cut back to Helga and there's just literally nothing left of her after a matter of seconds. By this point in the series, of course, it was tradition for Spectre No. 1 to take out failed hench people in such a way, but Cool Piranha Tank outdoes Poison Shoe Blade and Electric Chair for me, which is why this particular Blofeld kill is on this list. Number 6. So, as silly as Goldfinger's death is, Kananga definitely takes the award for the most outrageous. He literally blows up like a balloon and explodes. It's just so ridiculous. I mean, like, I can't begin to imagine that this could ever be achieved in real life. I mean, a person does not inflate like a helium balloon because of inhaling a compressed air pellet. I'm pretty sure about that. And to be quite honest, I'm not sure that the sharks that this particular weapon was designed for would explode in such a manner either. In fact, I would have thought that would be bad because, from what I understand of sharks, they're attracted to blood in water, so an exploding shark might attract an awful lot of other sharks. But regardless, it's hilarious. I love it. It's a lot of fun, and I don't know if there's much more to say about this particular one other than the filming techniques. Not that great. For some reason, there's a very awkward post-production zoom that goes right in on Kananga's face. This certainly wasn't an in-camera effect. I'm guessing that when they filmed it, the effect didn't look quite as impressive as they'd hoped, so they had to employ some quick and cheap editing tricks in order to mask wires or perhaps how silly the dummy looked. The moment is also over incredibly quickly. I can imagine on a first viewing an audience being like, what the hell just happened? Did he actually just explode? It's crazy, but that makes it all the more lovable, I think. Number 5. For many fans, I can imagine this would be their number 1. The pre-credit sequence of Casino Royale is truly wonderful. Watching Bond achieve his first 2 kills necessary in order to be ordained as a bona fide 00 agent. One of these kills is brutal. Lots of smashing around in a public toilet, ending with Bond drowning and shooting the guy. It's a good kill and set the tone for the new Craig era very well, but it's how he takes out this guy Dryden that really makes this sequence something special. He and Bond are having such a quiet conversation, and there's some great juxtaposition with Bond talking to Dryden and then the fight going on in the bathroom, but I just love how Dryden plays these moments. He's being all cool and calm because he thinks he can whip out his gun and take control of the situation, but Bond is, of course, one step ahead, and there's just this twinge of defeat and resignation on Dryden's face when he realises there's no ammo in his gun. He doesn't even try and get away, he's just accepting his fate and carries on the conversation, but Bond doesn't even give him the benefit of finishing his sentence. He's just like, nah, I'm bored of you now, bang. Small thing, but I also quite love that as Dryden is shot, we get this very quick pan, and for a few frames we see an image of what is presumably Dryden's family. It's a curious choice, and I'm not entirely sure what it's supposed to symbolise, that Dryden, despite being a villain, was still a human being with a family? Is it supposed to be from his perspective, and that's the last thing he sees before he dies? I'm not sure, but regardless of intent, I love it, and love this kill. Number 4. The only Bond villain to potentially still be orbiting Earth. Drax takes the number 4 spot on this list. Say what you will about Moonraker, Drax is one of the very best megalomaniac villains in the series, and the one who, admittedly, is adamant on finding an amusing death for 007. Drax is really the architect of his own demise, though, by being so obsessed with humiliating Bond in death. When he finally has the agent at gunpoint, he just can't seem to pull the trigger. It's like he's not content with just shooting Bond, and the wheels are turning in his head about how he could possibly make the most of the situation. I guess so he can boast about how he did it to all of his villain pals when they have their big monthly meetup? But, of course, Bond employs the use of his wrist dart gun to disable Drax, and then, not content with just letting the guy die from cyanide poisoning, no, Bond escorts Drax into an airlock and fires him out into space. I just love how he goes flying off into nothingness. It was the right impulse from the filmmakers. Shooting Drax with the dart wouldn't have been enough. The guy had to be ultimately done in by his love of space, and what a fitting end for the character it was.
Where's Drax?
Oh, he had to fly.
Number 3.
Don't you want to know why?
License to Kill is famously one of the most intense and brutal Bond films, so it's apt that the villain's death fits with that theme. The climax is a really great sequence and something of a slow build as Bond goes through a variety of trials and challenges in order to reach Franz Sanchez and finally show down with him, setting the petrol-soaked villain on fire with his Felix lighter, a satisfying bit of poetic revenge. It's a really pleasing bit of writing that the lighter that was set up earlier on in the film pays off here in such a grand way, but also that it was a gift from Felix. Of course, Bond's friend, who was subject to horrific acts by Sanchez in this film, having his new wife killed and losing a leg. It gives Felix some presence in this final fight, which is very fitting. Sanchez is a real nasty piece of work of a villain, and such a horrific death is appropriate. Even how we hear the villain scream for a bit until the tanker eventually blows up is, well, I mean, it's more brutal than what we have become accustomed to in the series, and yet anything less would have been so ultimately disappointing. My only negative about this particular death is that the pre-fire fight isn't as exciting or as long as it could be. Admittedly, it comes after a long sequence of action, but I don't know, I wanted a bit more fisticuffs, some more one-on-one before the final spark was lit, but nevertheless, still an awesome death. Number 2. An absolute classic one here. Oddjob's death is one of the most spectacular in the series. The henchman's razor-rimmed bowler hat is stuck between some metal bars in Fort Knox. He goes to grab it. Bond zaps the bars with a cut electric wire. Oddjob is fried. There's some creative license taken with representing the electrification of metal bars on screen, but who cares? The fireworks are wonderful. It's probably the best instance in the series of Bond using the villain's own special feature, if you will, to take them down, and it's much more satisfying when he does that instead of, necessarily using some Q gadget. But how Oddjob goes down here is just so cool. The preceding fight to the kill is so great as well, and largely without music, which I find very impressive. It's really just the sound effects doing the work here, which is brave but fitting. Oddjob's a largely silent villain after all. And you know what? Goldfinger is a film that's not shy to boast about its own opulence, much like its main villain. And I think Oddjob's death, being the fireworks show that it is just so perfect, and a fittingly iconic end for an iconic character. Number 1. Yes, it's another top 10 of mine where GoldenEye comes out on top, but with very good reason. Bond's fight with 006 at the end of the film is such a highlight. It's good and brutal. Both guys get bloodied and beat up, and it just escalates and escalates until both are on this tiny platform above the dish. Of course, Bond gets the upper hand, and it looks like Trevelyan is about to fall to his death when Bond catches him.
For England, James? No. For me.
That moment is so satisfying. Recalling the "For England" dialogue from the very start of the film is a great touch, and I just love that Trevelyan was already dead. Bond had won, but he caught him just so that he could really, truly savour the moment. I think it's one of Bond's most sadistic kills, and definitely one of Bond's defining moments. From a filming standpoint too, the whole sequence looks superb, and I just love how the impact of Trevelyan on the bottom of the dish merges with Boris screaming as the GoldenEye satellite burns up. But the extra kicker, the thing that really separates this kill from the rest for me, is that it isn't over when you think it is. Trevelyan is almost certainly mortally wounded, but he's still alive after the fall, so he has to undergo an extra final humiliation in the form of being completely crushed by his own base. It's the best villain kill in the entire series for me, but how about you guys? Is your favourite on this list? I'm very much aware that the Professor Dent kill from Dr. No is not in fact on this list, and I know that I'm going to get a lot of comments about that, but if you want to be one of those people commenting about it, then please do so below. Otherwise, please like this video, subscribe if you haven't, share it if you would care to do so, so that hopefully more Bond fans like yourself can get something out of these videos and this channel, and until next time, Bond fans, so long for now.